Hello and welcome to the Cubs on Deck podcast. I am one of your hosts. My name is Greg Huss, and today I am joined by my every other week co-host, Bryan Smith. Bryan, how's it going, man?
That's what everyone dreams to one day hear themselves called, the every other week co-host. I've made it to the big time, folks.
On the most niche podcast of all time, you are the every other week co-host.
Nice. I'm putting that on the resume tonight.
There you go. That goes on the Twitter bio for sure. So today we are back. So last week we had Sam Wiederhaft on the show, went through and basically ran down the Pelicans roster, getting to know some new names, all that good stuff. So if you guys have not listened to that, go check that out. That was a blast. Having the broadcasters on is always fun. Yeah. It just brings that different perspective onto the show, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, they have those connections too with the guys off the fields traveling and stuff like that. So, they get all those little nitty-gritty stories that I think really do paint like a meaningful context behind guys a lot. So yeah, I love it.
For sure. So we got 13 guys that we're talking about today. So this is if you're here to listen to Bryan and I run down some names pretty quick, you've come to the right place because we do like to go long on all of these. So we'll do our best to churn through them. We have 7 hitters and 6 pitchers that we want to talk about today. And our thinking was, my initial thought was kind of a buy or sell type deal, but I think that's not really fair because we talked off air and it's like we're not going to sell anybody really. So we're kind of reframing this entire episode as the question is, are you higher on X player than you were before the season? So we felt different ways about some of these 13 different players heading into the season. All 13 of these players have performed really, really well so far this year. These are all really strong performers, and it's just this episode is meant to kind of look at each guy individually and say, would they climb up our prospect rankings? Do we just view them as a guy that has a likelier chance to make the big leagues? All that good stuff. But it's going to be, I don't know. I think it's going to be fun running through these guys.
Yeah, I mean, these are probably 12 of maybe the 15 guys you'd consider that had the best month of April of anyone in the system, and I think it's an important time to just put some context around those numbers and they're performing great on the field. Is it also that we're seeing something that makes us think higher about their major league potential down the line?
Yeah, and I think you brought up a good point that it's kind of a good spot to try to make sense of some of the stats at this point because we're 50 to 70 plate appearances in for the hitters. Pitchers, we're probably not quite, but we've seen the new stuff from some of these guys. So pitchers, the stats aren't quite as leaning away from small sample sizes, but we're getting to the point with the hitters that the strikeout rates start to make sense if you're not Owen Casey, that type of deal. We will not be talking about Owen Casey today, despite me wearing the Owen Casey shirt. Shout out to Obvious Shirts on here. If you guys are not watching the YouTube video of this, that's what I'm wearing today. So we'll probably start off today with the hitters and then go to the pitchers if you're game for that.
Sure, let's do it.
All right, I think it's pretty appropriate. Well, honestly, what we'll do is we'll run through these from the highest level from AAA down to the low A level, and it seems really spot on to talk about Matt Mervis first, right? As we sit here, I mean, we've talked about Matt Mervis every single episode,
every week.
The last one, right? I didn't talk about him with Sam, but besides that, we've talked about him, I think, every single week on the show since it's existed. And we're at the point where he's close. You predicted a couple weekends ago that he would be up by this Washington Nationals series. I got on board with that. I was game for it. I think everybody's shouting for the Matt Mervis call up. I guess I'll kick it to you on that first, and then we'll get into the reason why we're talking about him after that.
Yeah, I mean, plain and simple, it's time. I don't think there's an explanation right now that makes sense for him not being up at this point. The success at the AAA level is long past the point of small sample size fueled success. The need at the major league level is glaring. And, we hear that stuff about, how are veterans around the league going to think about this? That just seems so made up to me, almost like a favor to an agent type of narrative. Veterans, if they're so in tune with the other 29 teams to be paying attention to how Eric Hosmer a guy who hasn't really been successful in 4 or 5 years is being treated by the organization that's paying him the league minimum. I mean, God bless those veterans that are that dialed in. I don't know that those are the kind of guys that we need to be servicing to not have our best 26 players on the roster.
It's the perfect scenario where you have a guy on league minimum and you have a guy in AAA that is mashing.
Yep.
It's the perfect scenario to call it Matt Mervis. So you're right. It's time. Let's get into actually why we want to talk about him here. So I'll run through some numbers as we get into each of these players here. And for the hitters, I'm going to be referencing Bash, which is the metric that I came up with this offseason. All the numbers, if you guys are listening to this episode on Tuesday, all the numbers over at Northside Bound on the statistics page are updated. So you can go check those out. I'm still running into some issues with getting those automated. So they publish every single morning. I'm having to go in and manually do it every morning when I get up early enough before work in the morning. So that's been super, super fun. But if you guys are listening on Tuesday before the game start, they are updated for sure. So these numbers that I'm listing off reflect that. So Matt Mervis has a 121 Bash, and with Bash, 130 is considered elite. 120 is considered like a great player, a great offensive performance. 110 is still very good. So Matt Mervis has a 121 Bash. He is striking out at a 133 K percentage plus and a 137 walk percentage plus. So basically, those are 100 is the league average. A higher number than that is better than league average. A lower number is worse than league average. So all of these guys are pretty much going to be better than league average across the board. Matt Mervis has been really good. So that begs the question: are you higher on Matt Mervis than you were before the season?
I'm going to say very slightly higher. I was pretty high. I had Matt as a top 5 prospect in the organization. I think that he's, succeeding in a way that I honestly kind of thought that he would succeed. The only slightly reaffirming bump that I see this year is just the plate approach, playing as well as it has him, basically continuing to keep that strikeout rate low, and then have the walk rate go higher than it was with AAA last year. To me, that just speaks to, it just gives you more confidence that his plate approach will work at the major league level, that some of the doubts we heard this offseason about, the types of pitches he can and can't hit were probably overstated. So, I don't know that I'm meaningfully higher, but maybe I just have more confidence in my optimism.
Yeah. I think that I fall in a very, very similar category as you, and I'm going to say no, that I'm not higher on him. But while you're just kind of rounding up, I think I'm rounding down. I think that's what it comes down to. Yeah. I think we're seeing a lot, for the most part, we're seeing a lot of what we saw from last year. You're right. We are seeing a continued improvements as far as plate approach goes. But I'm at the point where I just want to see him do it at the major league level, and as we let off talking about Matt Mervis, it's all about getting that experience at the major league level, seeing what he can do against MLB pitching, not only in the first few weeks, but like extended over the course of a couple months or so. I'd love to see that. I'm not really higher on Matt Mervis. I wouldn't, if I'm re-ranking right now, I don't think I'd rank him any higher than I had him prior. I love what I'm seeing from Matt Mervis, obviously, but I'm the same as I was preseason.
I think I would have him third. I have to say.
You'd have him the third prospect in the system? I
think I would right now.
Behind PCA, Alcantara, then Mervis?
I think that's where I would land, yeah.
I would not. I would not have. I don't know, man. You just have a whole lot of confidence. I mean, I have a confidence in the bat too, but like I just have a hell of a time ranking a first base prospect.
Yeah. I mean, we're just so close to the majors now that I don't know. The optimism and projection is higher than you're going to get with pretty much any other prospect. It's like when Justin Steele went back to Iowa that last time and was starting and having success there. I remember saying I thought he was the number 3 prospect at that time, and it was just like, this guy is a major leaguer. We know it at this point. So that checks like one of the major boxes that a lot of prospects have to check. So that goes a long way for me.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'd rank him still around the number 10 range. Not at 10. I'd say like between, off the top of my head, 6 and 9, probably nice.
Sure.
That was not intentional. I wish it was. All right, let's move on to another guy that is currently in Iowa, actually not getting the Iowa offense. I mean, we're not going to go into detail about this, but the Iowa offense has been
Stupid.
otherworldly, like insane over the
Yep.
past, I mean, the entire season. Last week, they put up 18 runs twice. They put up 13 runs a different game. I think they're averaging over 8 runs per game this year, which is like not
400 on base percentage for the season. There is their team on base percentage.
I saw you tweet out that they have the same OPS as A-Rod.
As A-Rod's career OPS, yeah.
That's outrageous. So with that being said, because that offense has been so good, a guy like Yonathan Perlaza has not gotten as many plate appearances as what we would probably like to see this year. But when he has gotten plate appearances, he's been really strong. 127 bash for Perlaza with an 85% or 85 K percentage plus and a 124 walk percentage plus. So still striking out a little bit more than league average, but like he has been really strong. He's put together really good at bats, like we've grown accustomed to seeing from Perlaza the past 2 years prior to this now.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, to jump in with, I guess, our question of the episode, I don't think that I'm higher on Perlaza than I was before the year. To be honest, his plate appearance number is probably the lowest of guys on this list. He has 56 so far. He didn't see a lot of time in the first 3 weeks. And then really these numbers are fueled by the week that he just had against Louisville in 5 games. He had a 1220 OPS in his last 5 games against Louisville in a series where Iowa just went, like you said, completely insane. And so I do have, I don't want to change my priors, I guess, based on really 5 games, especially when it has that context of like everyone was hitting. The Iowa Stadium is producing a ton of offense this year, so there's some park factor stuff to consider. A series where they dominated pitchers, there's some opposing pitcher stuff to consider. I really like Perlaza. I think he has a chance to be a big league bat. There's a lot of positives from what he's done so far, but it has not yet moved the needle for me in terms of how I would rank and think about him.
I'm the same on Perlaza. I'm with you. I'm not higher on him than I was preseason. I viewed him preseason, and I still view him now as being a 4th or 5th outfielder at the major league level. I think 4th is best case scenario. 5th is where he might be now. Like he might be able to hold his own as a 5th outfielder at the major league level right now. I guess where do you fall with Perlaza in terms of like the needing? I mean, the outfield is pretty stacked up at the major league level, right? Bellinger is MVP form. Seiya is performing pretty well. Ian Happ is Ian Happ. You got Nelson Velasquez, who's performed very well in his time at the major league level. Trey Mancini is, I guess you can still put outfield next to his name, maybe.
Right.
But I guess in terms of the guys that are in Iowa right now, like where do you rank Perlaza as like maybe if something goes wrong with injuries, call him up?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's tricky. I mean, even Mike Tauchman has been awesome in the times that he's gotten on the field. And then, now you got to be finding more and more at-bats for Nelly at the major league level. It's such a spot of depth for the Cubs. And I think the important thing to remember is that Perlaza is a minor league free agent at the end of this year. He signed a 1-year sort of free agent extension thing in the minor leagues with the Cubs. And, I have a hard time believing he'll do that again. So I think if he doesn't make the 40-man roster by the end of the season, he probably moves on to a different organization. So the Cubs will have a big decision probably in the last 2 months of the season. Like, do we want to give this guy a look and further evaluate what it looks like at the major league level? Or do we just have too many outfielders?
Yeah, it's all. I mean, he's not on the 40-man roster, so like a lot of weird things would have to happen for there to be space on the 40-man for him to get added to, all that good stuff. And I think that like Tauchman is probably a guy that we see at the major league level before Perlaza, just because he's been there before, and he performed well during spring, all that good stuff. So
probably has an opt out too.
I'm sure he has an opt out. Yeah, yeah, exactly. All right, let's go down the ladder here. We'll go down to AA, and we got a couple of catching prospects that we can talk about simultaneously here. Miguel Amaya has been incredibly strong to start off this year, which is one of my favorite things, right?
Yes.
It's one of my favorite things of the system so far this year. He's got a 136 bash with a 96 K percentage plus and a 120 walk percentage plus. And then his catching tandem, his catching mate is Pablo Aliendo, who's also been very good, albeit in fewer plate appearances. He's got a 135 bash, a 106 K percentage plus, and a 105 walk percentage. He's been good across the board too. Both these guys really strong. Honestly, very different, like how they've gotten to this point. Like extremely different how they've gotten to this point. Are you higher on either of these guys?
I think I am higher. I'm gonna say on both of them. Probably Aliendo has taken a larger jump for me. More because, this is Amaya, I think, doing a lot of what we sort of thought he could do if he was healthy. I mean, the amazing thing to me is that there's been no real cold streak. There's been no rust to shake off. He basically got right back to his plate approach in terms of walking a bunch. He has struck out a lot. Maybe that's where you see the rust a little bit, but he's also showing power in a way that he wasn't before. And so it's been all positive with Miguel. Yan Gomes actually got hurt in tonight's major league game. There's a chance maybe that Amaya could fill in with the Cubs for a couple days, which would be just such an amazing story. Aliendo, though, for me has jumped more. I've never been the biggest believer. I've always seen him as a little fringy on the tool side. But even dating back to when I saw him in spring training, he's a guy that just looks stronger and he's hitting the ball harder. And if he's doing that, then I do see a path for him in the bigs. And so he has sort of begun to change my evaluation.
Pablo Aliendo and Kevin Made must have been working out together this offseason because they both got significantly stronger.
Yeah.
I think Miguel Amaya is just like I had so many, but I'm saying yes to both as well. With Miguel Amaya, it's just, I mean, I was so concerned about his return, right? I mean, between the Tommy John and Liz Frank last year, and then also another knee besides that, or another. He missed so much time that I'm losing track here. But I was so concerned about him returning from injury and not only being rusty because he was out for so long, but just like not being back to his former self. And instead, like I mentioned it last episode with Sam, it's like he looks entirely different than what we like remember Miguel Amaya looking like a few years ago. I think I'm actually higher on Miguel Amaya compared to preseason than I am Pablo Aliendo. Okay. I think that like Miguel, I'd have to go back and look for sure at my prospect list, but I had him like down near 30, I'm sure. And just because of all those concerns, I don't know, man. I'd have to spell it all out and all that good stuff. But like he's approaching in my eyes a 10 to 15 ranked prospect again. I'm really, really pleased with both these guys. I see both of these guys. I mean, I think that for a while I had talked for a while about Miguel Amaya being like that starting catcher on a non-playoff team or a really solid backup on a playoff team. I said that for years, and I think I'm approaching being back at that place again.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I think the big key for me is the month of May, like get these two guys both in the lineup more. Don't give them as many days off as they had in April. I understand why you do that in April. I'm not doubting Lance Reinl for those decisions, but I think now let's rip the Band-Aid off. Let's get those guys, at least 5 starts a week, and and then in a month, I think we'll really have a good idea of what of how to think about these guys.
Yeah, and I think we saw Miguel Amaya getting a little bit of playing time at first base, which is always good, and it's less of a. I mean, it partially probably give him a break from catching, but mostly just because like let's get at bats for both these guys, man. It's that you don't see very often, like those type of situation. 2 guys in the positions they're in being at the same affiliate as far as catchers go.
Totally,
it's an interesting setup. Let's go from 2 catchers down the ladder to South Bend to a guy who is no longer a catcher. Haydn McGeary has been made. There's a lot of stories of the system so far this year, but Haydn McGeary might be up there. He's got a 140 bash, which is the second best of any guy we're talking about here today. A 130 K percentage plus and a 129 walk percentage plus. Haydn McGeary has been actually so good. I'll lead off with this one. Yes. I am so much higher on Haydn McGeary than I know that fans. I think a lot of people out there listening right now were already very high on Haydn McGeary. Him and Moises Ballesteros, who we're going to talk about next, were on the short list of like fan favorites heading into the season. And when you put up college numbers that Haydn did, like obviously that makes sense for that to be the case. Plus, you add the fact that he's a huge human being. Like there was just a lot of like fan favorite qualities about Haydn McGeary. But he is just like, for me, it's the strikeouts that are most impressive. It's the batting average and strikeouts because he's a big guy. I knew he was going to he's going to hit for power, and he was whether it was going to show in games yet. I was feeling like it would, but it really has. And it's really limiting the strikeouts and the batting average going up that have impressed me the most. And that ability to limit the strikeouts is going to be huge for a guy with long levers like him.
Yeah, I'm with you. He's an absolute yes for me. I think a lot of those people that seemed so high on him at the beginning of the year, I thought were wish casting a little bit more than, actually evaluating. And, I'll take the L there. They were right. And, my evaluation, I think, was less so. I guess as a preview for what I'm working on right now, by the end of this week at Bleacher Nation, I think I'm going to finish writing my profile on Haydn. I spoke with him last week, his college coach, a few members of the Cubs organization. And so I'll have a profile on him and be able to explain a little more. But yeah, I think it's really exciting that this is just a guy who's all around hit tool. Like the power tool is obvious when you see him just in person and how big he is, but the hit tool is better than I thought it would be. And it's exciting.
Any spoilers, any like small spoilers about what you're writing?
Really it's just a profile trying to introduce people to the guy. But, I think the one quote that someone with the Cubs said to me that really sticks out is just that Haydn's miss hits are other people's barrels, is a good evaluation phrase that's going to stick with me for a while. So, yeah, people really like Haydn and really speak highly of his work ethic.
I love that quote a lot. I love that quote a lot. All right, man. Let's go down to Myrtle Beach and another guy that might not be at the level he's at for very much longer. Moises Ballesteros has been. We talked about him quite a bit on last episode, so we won't stick on him for too awful long. But it's worth pointing out that he has the second best batch in the entire system at 154. He's got a 151 strikeout percentage plus and a 135 walk percentage plus. The dude's 19 years old and he's not striking out. He refuses to strike out, and he's a guy that hits for power. Yes, he is high. I'm higher on him now than I was preseason, and I was high on him preseason, dude. Like I just think that Moises Ballesteros, I don't care if he's a catcher or not. Like I'm buying into the bat, and because I'm buying into the bat so much more now, I think he might be able to be a catcher at South Bend as he climbs the ladder a little bit. Long term, I don't know, man. But as Sam and I were talking about on last week's show, it's like it's one of those things where you let the bat carry him through the system, right? You're not going to hold him back in South Bend or in Tennessee or in Iowa or wherever because like you need the glove to catch up. If the dude's going to hit, he's going to hit, and you keep climbing up the ladder, So yes, I'm higher on Moises than I was preseason.
So, man, I was on the fence with this one. I think the answer is yes, but there's some nuance to it. I think that the part for me that's higher is, to me, the odds that he's going to be a good enough hitter to make the major leagues, like that has gone up, I think. And so that's probably where my yes is coming from. Ceiling wise, I think this is within sort of the bounds of what I imagined was possible for him, really pure hitter. I do think that, the low A pitchers that Myrtle has faced so far, his plate approach is smarter than their secondary pitches are good. And so I do want to see it at one more level, I guess, before I really truly up the hype to that sort of next tier. So I wouldn't say he's jumped a tier for me. If he has jumped, it's relatively small, but I am starting to see okay, the floor here with how good this bat is pretty high.
Give the people what they want. When do you think that we see Ballesteros, Mo Baller, up in South Bend?
I'm gonna say probably Memorial Day if this continue. If he has another good month, I would say that around then is when it's possible, which is pretty crazy for a 19-year-old. But to a certain extent, I don't think it makes sense to baby these guys too much and to just because he's 19, say that he has to spend the whole year at low A. If he's not going to strike out for like weeks at a time, it's not really doing anybody any favors to have him there. So, I'm ready. Let's go.
I mean, I've said it before. It's like it's the Owen Casey thing, right? Like we saw Owen Casey, the 19-year-old South Bend. Is there that much difference in? I mean, the raw power is there more for Owen Casey, but like, is there that much of a difference that you can't expect to see Moises Ballesteros as a 19-year-old in South Bend? I think the answer is like pretty clearly no to that.
Yeah, I mean, he covers the plate better than Owen does in terms of just getting the bat to the ball.
Yeah. All right, we got one more hitter, and this is not yet a guy that we really talked about on this podcast at all. Jefferson Encarnacion. He was a minor league Rule 5 selection this past offseason by the Cubs. So far this year in Myrtle Beach, he's put up a 116 bash, striking out a little bit worse than league average at a 93% strikeout percentage plus, but he's walking 144% or 144 walk percentage plus. So he's been really strong. I'll kick it to you. I'll say real quick, my answer is yes, because he was so unknown, but I'll kick it to you. Are you higher on Encarnacion than you were preseason?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a case of like a guy not on the radar is now, has to at least be on the radar. Really good job by the pro scouting department finding him and making him a minor league Rule 5 pick. Those are hard guys to unearth. I mean, this is a guy that had not played much in the past 3 years. But seeing him in person, it's a really like impressive, like athletic frame. There's some like size, strength, and athleticism all to it. As a prospect, like when we think about major league potential, he's still probably more like an honorable mention type prospect to me than a rankable one. You're seeing a lot of balls on the ground still. Like, it's a little bit Babbitt fueled, the success he's having so far. So I want to see how that evens out a little bit. But yeah, I mean, he's put himself on the map. He's given himself a reason to be in the lineup more, and that deserves some plaudits too. It's not
the same. He's not the same profile, but to a certain degree, he reminds me a little bit of what we've seen in past years from Jonathan Sierra. Sierra did not walk this much during his time in the Cubs system, but like in terms of where he falls, in terms of like potential, in terms of like where he falls in like rankings and stuff like that, that's where I kind of see Encarnacion right now. He's an right fielder that is like on the radar. We were constantly just like keeping Jonathan Sierra in the back of our minds, for like probably far too long. But as like a pro prospect, we were like thinking about like, just don't forget about Jonathan Sierra. Like we can't forget about him. That's where I'm at with Jefferson Encarnacion right now. Still, you're right. Still too early. It's first game action in since 2021?
And even that I think was really like a short amount of time.
Yeah. So I just want to be able to get Encarnacion in this segment. We almost talked about him last week with Sam. I wish we would have had time, but we had plenty of other players to talk about.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good squad.
All right. You want to go ahead and transition to some pitchers here?
Yeah, let's do it.
We're actually making decent time. We're not doing too bad, dude.
Yeah, hey, for once, we're gonna get this thing under like the length of a movie, guys.
All right. So again, we're gonna start at the top here. I've got different numbers for each of these guys, just because I want to point out some strong suits of each player. We're gonna start off with Riley Thompson, who's up in Iowa and who's been really, really strong. Riley Thompson has a WHIP of 0.73. He's striking out 35% of the batters he faces this year. He's got he's given up a 102 batting average, and a 107 BABIP, which is, we were texting earlier. It's one of the strangest stats I've ever seen, I think. I mean, like super, like not sustainable in any way, shape or form for either of those things. Right. But, what do you think about Riley Thompson? Are you higher on him now than you were preseason?
I am higher on him. I think one thing that's always held Riley back in rankings is he's pretty much always been older than the average player at his level, in part because he's just had some rough injury luck over the years. So, those injuries just caught up with him. He was always old. It was really nothing there was nothing he could do about it. But we get to Iowa this year and we get to see those StatCast numbers that the Hawkeye TrackMan system gives us. And Riley just jumps out, Riley, his fastball carries more than, good 85% of major leaguers. He actually, just this weekend, I was looking at he had a relief appearance last week, 2-inning relief appearance, which we'll have to see. Are they thinking about him more as a reliever in the weeks to come or a starter? But something we saw in that relief appearance was a cutter, a second version of a slider, and he threw the slider too. So they are two different pitches. They, almost, I want to say 8 inches difference of vertical break, which now gives him 6 pitches. I mean, this is a guy that was throwing 3 pitches like a year ago, basically. And really, like those first couple outings last year with Tennessee, it was pretty much just 4-seam curveball. And he threw six pitches in a 2-inning relief appearance last week. So to me, like between the spin, the velocity, and the diversity of offerings, yes, I'm higher on Riley.
I don't know if you saw when you were talking. I don't know if you saw me. You mentioned the cutter, and I was sitting over here trying to count the pitches, and then you went and you're like, "Oh, 6 pitches." So I appreciate you saying that, because I was sitting over here trying to count them. Are you higher on Riley Thompson now compared to after the 2019 season? If you'll think back to that.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go back and look to see where I ranked him, but I'm probably like, it's probably pretty close. I mean, he left that 2019 season on just the absolute highest of highs, where he had like one of the best starts of any Cubs prospect in the championship game that won South Bend that title. So that's like a big exclamation point to leave a season on. But he also had 5 no-hit innings in his last start in Iowa a couple weeks ago. So yeah, it's probably pretty close. I mean, he's a major league arm, and if I had doubts about that before the year, they are gone. The quality of his pitches are major league quality pitches. So he might be a little old. His track record might not be like other top prospects' track records, but somewhere along the way, a team is going to find a way to make him work in the bigs.
So I am higher on him than I was preseason, very clearly. But to make it more challenging, going back to my question of like, am I higher on him than I was postseason 2019 when he was coming off that really strong year with South Bend? I think I'm even higher on him now, barely, than I was back then. I think back then I just had the constant like fear. Fear is a strong word, but constant fear that like he was just dominating because he was so old for his level. He was a 23-year-old guy in South Bend and low A South Bend at the time. So yeah, I had that worry in the back of my mind back then, and now I'm looking at him and it's like, all right, he's this close. He's in Iowa. He's this close to the major leagues. It doesn't really matter what his age is all that much, and he's still like a young. Like if he was called up to the big leagues, he'd still be a young guy, obviously. So I think I'm higher on him now than I was back then. And I don't know. It's just I think that it's that mix of pitches. He feels like a major leaguer more now than he did back then. I guess that's not very analytically driven or any crazy things scouting things I'm looking at. It's just he feels more like a major leaguer now, And yep. I think that it's him battling back, him coming back strong from all that bad injury luck, him missing so much time. It's like the fact that he can come back strong like this is really, really impressive in my eyes.
Yeah, I just looked it up. I had him 12th before the 2020 season, but that was a much worse Cubs farm system. I'd probably have him, maybe about 20th now. And that might honestly be a bigger compliment than 12th was back then.
That's what I was thinking too. It's a big difference in the system now compared to then.
Yep.
Big difference. All right, let's actually stick with Iowa. A guy who just got called up to Iowa and is making his first Iowa start on Wednesday, I believe, is Ben Brown. Ben Brown, during his time in Tennessee this year, I don't know when the Cubs minor league pitcher of the month awards will get handed out here. I'm sure in the next few days. And when that comes down, I'm sure it will be Ben Brown because he put up a 0.45 ERA, a 39% strikeout rate, an 8% walk rate, and a called strike whiff (CSW) percentage of 37%. Where 30%, if you're at 30%, like you're pretty damn good. So he's at 37%. Stupid numbers, dude. Like just crazy numbers. Now, I'll ask you, are you higher on him? But I want to preface by saying something like the answer could very easily be yes. But something that's sticking in my mind to a certain degree is that there are those new baseballs in AA. And I know like at some point, like dominating becomes like dominating. It doesn't matter what the balls are like in AA, but there's something to that. They're like the pre-tacked baseballs, right? That they're experimenting with at the AA level. And I have a feeling that the spin rates are pretty significantly higher in AA than anywhere else in the minor leagues.
Interesting. Yeah, that honestly, I kind of forgot that context, so I'm glad you mentioned it. I want to go to you first, and actually, I want to frame it this way, if we can. Who are our top 3 pitching prospects in the Cubs system? And rank them if you can just do it. Guys, don't hold us to this. This is off the cuff stuff, but I'm curious where you're at, Greg.
The 3 names to me are Wicks, Horton, and Brown.
Yep.
Do you have the same 3 names?
Those are the same. Yeah, okay. I have the same 3 names.
Okay. Give me. I think Jordan Wicks is still my number 1. I do. I think Jordan Wicks is still my number 1 guy. Dude, Horton and Brown is tough. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go Horton and then Brown.
Okay.
But yeah, don't hold me to that. What do you got?
I think, without wanting to be too reactionary, I think that I would have Brown 1 and then Horton and then Wicks. So I guess I would be flip-flopped with yours. And so, getting into our question of the episode, like, yes, I'm higher. I am meeting our friend Lance Brosdowski from Marquee, where he was at before the year. Credit to Lance. He had been 4th in the system in his rankings. And I think Lance had gotten a little look in spring training that helped those rankings a little bit at the slider and changeup combination that Ben added this offseason. The slider is legit. I think the shape of it is not the same every time he throws it still, but he's thrown enough good ones that I think you have real confidence in it. And I don't know, like Jordan Wicks has had like good success to start this year. His last outing, he threw 5 no-hit innings in AA. The at-bat difference that I'm seeing in AA hitters in Ben versus Jordan is different to me. Ben, like the at-bats are less competitive. Ben is making a lot more hitters look foolish. I just have so much belief that his best 2 pitches work. Now he's showing 2 other solid pitches. Like, the floor to me is so high, and I think the ceiling's pretty darn high too. So I think he's my top pitching prospect right now.
Yeah, I actually my answer is no. I think, because I feel like, obviously he's been incredibly good this year, but I was also very high on. I thought that he was really impressive last year. I think I'm doing the same thing that I did with Matt Mervis, right? Where I think I'm just rounding down, and I'm just going to say no. But that's not what I'm going to talk about as much. I guess I know we're spending the entire episode talking about this question, but I don't know, man. To me, Jordan Wicks, I feel like 95% confident that he's a number 4 in the big leagues. I feel so confident in Jordan Wicks being a number 4 in the big league, at least a number 4.
Yeah.
Ben Brown and Cade Horton, I can see like putting together. Not to this extent, but like what Justin Steele has done since the deadline last year, right? That's about what it is, right? Since the deadline last year, where he's put up like a 1.5 ERA. I could see them being like that next homegrown stud. And so like to me, I see a little more variance in Brown and Cade Horton than I do with Jordan Wicks. But I think they both can be studs. I think that Jordan Wicks can be a stud too. I'm like falling back on just like I feel really confident in like what his floor is with Jordan Wicks. All 3 of those dudes, man, they're just so exciting. They've all been really, really good this year. We're not even talking about Cade Horton, and he has the most ridiculous numbers in the system this year as far as pitchers go. I think that like Ben Brown's done it over more innings, but I think that Cade Horton's numbers have been better than Ben Brown's.
Yeah, Cade's just. We talked about this the last time I was on with you. Just He's just not in a place where the other hitters are at his talent level. So it's almost hard to evaluate.
We've gone off the deep end enough here. Let's rein it back in and stick another guy that's in Iowa that was previously in Tennessee, Bailey Horn. Honestly, dude, like he's another guy that is. I think that like if there's a reliever of the system, a reliever of the month in the system, Bailey Horn would very clearly get that award. This year, he's put up opponents are hitting just 0.91 off of Bailey Horn, which is like unfathomable.
Strikeout rate though. Oh
yeah, he's got a 53% strikeout rate,
God.
a 0.80 whip, and a 40 called strike whiff rate. 40% CSW, a 53% strikeout rate, dude. That seems almost not real. Are you higher on Bailey Horn than you were preseason?
No. I'm gonna say no. I had Bailey ranked as a top 50 prospect. So I will pat myself on the back for that. I will also say that, like, you know, the reason Bailey Horn was in Double-A was because the Cubs wanted to keep a lot of their offseason minor league veteran signings. So they stacked Triple-A with Ryan Barucki and Anthony Kay. And, you know, there were a lot of guys there. And Bailey just got pushed to Double-A because that was the most convenient option. Bailey didn't, like, the Cubs knew Bailey didn't belong in Double-A. Like, the majors was a more sensible assignment for Horn than Double-A was. And so, like, you know, I don't know that even taught us anything essentially, except like last year's end of season success was not a fluke. I mean, the pitches that we're seeing are still the pitches there. You know, he touched 97 in his last Tennessee outing, which he did a couple times last summer as well. The really cool thing I saw that I'll point out is in his Iowa appearance, since we get to see the movement data there, his last pitch in that first AAA appearance was a curveball that dropped 70 inches. 70 inches. I looked it up. There have only been 150 curveballs this whole season in the major leagues that have dropped 70 inches, and over half of them have either been thrown by Rich Hill or Chris Bassett. And there's only like 15 pitchers, I think, or even less maybe, that have got to that number. So Bailey Horn's got this really, really fun, just like, I mean, it was a 73 mile per hour, just looping curveball. But then like you try to sit on that at all, and he's got that great horizontal slider, and then, you know, a guy that can get it up to 97. So it's a really fun mix. And, you know, I do think he's a major league arm.
One of my favorite things now, I don't think this was the case even a year ago. One of my favorite things is a pitcher being able to show a really good curveball, but not have to rely on it. That's been my thing this year, man. Yeah. And Bailey Horn has that very clearly. I am higher on Bailey than I was preseason. I don't think I think preseason I just hadn't hopped on the bandwagon that I think honestly most of you guys, like I think Zumac was on the bandwagon with Bailey Horn. I think Todd was. I think most of you guys were. I think Mike Ernst probably was to a certain degree. I wasn't quite there yet with Bailey Horn, and so I think that's why my answer is yes. It's less about what I think it's less about like I am just super, super impressed, and it's more, I mean, which I am, but it's more, I'm just like, I'm glad that we're seeing that continue over into this year that we saw at the end of last year. So my answer is yes, but for a different reason, you know.
AAA is going to be really interesting because, like, I would say Bailey got some looks in spring training with the big league team, and really, like, he did not show well. And he's a guy that, you know, I think if you have questions about him, you wonder if the feel is too inconsistent to be a major league reliever when, like, you know, you can't come out of a big league bullpen and just not have it that day. I mean, that's a good way to just never stick in the bigs. So Bailey's going to have to show the Cubs that, like, when we get to these high pressure outings, like, he's bringing it every time. But, you know, in that department, he's off to a really good start.
Yeah, that is a good point, because that's where he ran into trouble a year ago. Like before the breakout towards the end of the year, he was pretty consistently like really good performance, clunker. Yep. Really good performance, clunker. Like that was pretty consistently throughout the year how he was. So you're right. As a reliever, you can't do that at the big league level for sure.
He's one of those guys that pitches like on the side of the baseball. Porter Hodge is like that, and Porter Hodge, has had a really slow start to the year where he hasn't had good feel after having a spring training that was fantastic. And I think that is a thing that you see with some of those supination guys is like, when you have a two-seam fastball and you're behind the ball completely, I think you're naturally going to have better feel than those guys that are really like on the side of the ball and have that sort of cut ride that the Cubs do like, but I think at times can be a detriment.
I just saw Greg Zumack pop out from out of nowhere when you said the words cut ride.
Yeah.
All right, let's go down to South Bend. We're actually skipping over because Ben Brown and Bailey Horn were called up to Iowa. We're skipping over Double-A Tennessee. We're going down to South Bend and Brandon Birdsell, who has a 0.57 ERA this year, a 0.64 WHIP, and opponents are putting up an OPS. This is not a batting average. They're putting up an OPS of 280 against Birdsell. So where do you stand? Are you higher on the Texas Tech righty than you were preseason?
I think so. I not a ton higher. I think I still am kind of getting my evaluation together a little bit. I have watched all of his outings, and he's to me one of the most interesting guys to watch. I mean, he's just the ball just comes from his back shoulder magically. All of a sudden it's it goes through his back, out his chest, and then to the hitter. It's hitters must walk away what the hell did I just face? I think the stuff seems to be big league quality to me. But some of it maybe right on the border. That's what I'm kind of trying to get a feel for. I feel like the fastball and the slider look really good. It's to me a question of how much reliever risk do you see in Brandon? I think is going to decide a lot on how he gets ranked. And that's where I haven't quite landed. But as a guy that we'd never seen pitch in the system before, you come out like that, and I think he's put a stamp on and been okay, I'm someone that needs to be considered in top 30 conversations, and that is a bump from where I had him. So, I suppose it's yes.
Yeah, my answer is yes too, for a lot of the same reasons. I think I was hesitant to put many expectations on him leading into the year, and you can't really argue with the results. You can't really argue too much with the stuff at this point. He's been really strong. I think one of the most encouraging things for me with Brandon Birdsell is the fastball has been sitting in the mid-90s, which is we saw in years past. I think that less in 21, 22, this era of drafted players into affiliated ball, more in the 2017 to 19 range, where a guy would be in college sitting mid 90s or low 90s, and instead he would come into pro ball and he'd be throwing low 90s to high 80s or whatever it might be. He would just come a few ticks lower. I don't know I don't know if you have a theory behind the reasoning behind that. I don't. But I was very encouraged to see him reported from college touching mid 90s and confirmed now in South Bend still touching 96. He's touched 97 a couple times, but he's really sitting 94 to 95 around that area. I love that. That's super encouraging to me, and super I can imagine that gets up on hitters, man. Especially the way he throws. 95 from your ear is gotta for a batter is gotta feel 98, 99.
And it's it's been cold, and I mean, pitchers their velocity peaks out in the summer, usually in August when their arms are totally used to throwing. Brandon's touched 97 in Midland, Michigan in mid 40s last week, and so yeah, I mean, I think the velo is definitely legit. He's also got that great veteran, a big league veteran mound presence of just he's just insulted by the hitter in the box. Why do you think you belong here in the same field as me? That sort of Texas red ass, just I'm better than you. I love it. I want that on my team.
So real quick, I think I talked about after I came back and saw him throw at Quad Cities, his first start. I talked about on the podcast about how he just looked brutal in the bullpen before the game. He did not throw good bullpen. Then he went out on the mound during the game, shoved. Watching the bullpen, he just I know he cared that the bullpen was not good, but like his demeanor is like, man, like I'm just gonna go out there and kill it on the mound anyways, like during the game. So like, what does it matter? You know what I mean? Like it was like that demeanor. Like I knew he cared. He wanted to have a good bullpen session, but like he was like the confidence and just that demeanor is like you nailed it. It's that Texas Red ass demeanor. I love it. All right, let's go to Richard Gallardo, which I tweeted a little thread about Richard Gallardo this after his start this past weekend. He is just one of the most interesting cases of development in the entire system. So strange, so much fun and interesting to follow. So far this year, Gallardo has pitched to a 2.84 ERA. His WHIP is 1.03, and opponents are hitting just 217 off of him. Are you higher on him now than you were preseason? I'll answer first.
Sure.
In that I am not. In that tweet thread that I had earlier this weekend, I mentioned that it feels just an awful lot like last year, where he was assigned to Myrtle Beach. Clearly, like he's too good for that level, and he just needed that promotion up to South Bend to be challenged a little bit more. That like the peripheral numbers are not great on Richard Gallardo. Like, right, he's not striking guys out a ton. He's not getting a whole lot of swings and misses. It's a lot of the same that we saw from him last year, but he's producing results. And at some point, like you just gotta like say the results are there to a certain degree. I like to see that, you know. He hasn't come out this year and like wowed me with the stuff, and I think that's the big reason why I'm not higher on him than I was last year or coming into this year. I like that he's popping more mid 90s than low 90s. I guess I'll stick with that. That's fun. But like I said, like the results are the results, man. Like he's getting them. I'd love to see him promoted up to Tennessee, see what he can do in Double-A. But yeah, he reminds me a lot of like how he got signed years ago as a teenager. Like he was signed as a polished pitcher as a teenager. He looks the same body wise for the most part. He looks the same stuff-wise for the most part. He has the same repertoire for the most part. He's getting the same results for the most part. Like, everything is the same as when he signed. I'm not saying that in a negative way, right? Like, because he's climbing the ladder and still doing the same stuff. It's just he hasn't really changed. In a world where pitchers change from week to week, Gallardo has stayed the same for the last 4 years.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think if you're a buyer on Gallardo, you're going to point to Javier Assad and be like, aren't we seeing a lot of the same things we saw with Assad, which is like, you know, execution first and foremost, like a guy that goes out there, eats innings, executes, and then like gets a little better at a time. Like, the little differences that you would point to that are like, slightly contradicting what you're saying are like, yeah, he touches 95 more than he did in the past. Yeah, he throws a slider, more than, he did back then. He did grow 2 inches, got a little heavy, and then, I think did a pretty good job, like starting to wear that weight better. And I think I think he fills out a uniform better than he did a year ago, and certainly 2 years ago. So there's gradual improvements, but this is like Javier Assad before the breakout that took him to the major leagues. And it can't be sort of overstated that that's a really, really, really impossibly difficult breakout to have. Like going from just like average Double-A player to succeeding in the bigs is not easy. And it takes your stuff going to another level, and like your belief and like your mound presence and your execution all have to jump, like all simultaneously. Assad, it was like a miracle that it happened like it did. The answer to the question for me is also no, because I just don't see enough breaking balls that are close to major league quality. But I do kind of see a path where, okay, if the Cubs can get him there, if he can learn a cutter and it be, have the same similar success that Assad's had in Double-A, and then you get that curveball a little sharper than it is, maybe the pieces come together, but it's still a long shot to me.
Jimmy and I on the Growing Cubs show, we're talking about Richard Gallardo on our first episode, I feel like. And back then, it felt like we had prospect fatigue on Richard Gallardo. And he's still only 21 years old, and we're talking about him today. Richard Gallardo has throws the second fewest pitches per plate appearance in the system at 3.67, which is very on brand for what he's done over the past few years. Can you name the guy that is number one with the fewest pitches per plate appearance of any pitcher in the system?
I'm going to say Walker Powell.
That was a good guess. That's also where I would have gone. This guy does not really make sense for being number one, so it was probably unfair for me to ask you. Porter Hodge is the guy that currently throws the fewest pitches per plate appearance.
I think that's a lot of first pitch fastballs in the zone that are getting hit for singles so far this year, just anecdotally.
I think you're absolutely right. That's a number that will change throughout this year for sure.
Yeah.
All right, our final guy here, as we're about hitting the 1 hour mark, we kind of did well here today. Luke Little is our guy that we're talking about here. So far this season as a starting pitcher, his last outing was actually his career high. He went a full 5 innings of work, and as a starting pitcher, he's gone with a 0.57 ERA, one of the best in the system, very clearly. A strikeout rate of 27%, a walk rate of a very reasonable 11%, which is fun to see, and a ground ball rate, which is always astronomically high at 61%, according to Baseball Reference numbers. Luke Little just came out today, South Bend, in their weekly report leading up to the series, said that Luke Little will be working out of the bullpen now, which is super, super fun to see. We'll see if he can hit triple digits on the gun like we know he could in the past, that he can ramp it up in 1 or 2 inning spurts. Are you higher on Luke Little than you were preseason?
I don't think so, because I honestly think that what we're seeing is pretty much we're seeing the dominance, we're seeing the opposing at bats, and we're seeing a lot of the stuff that is similar to last year. And that's a compliment, because, this is a guy that dominated last year. I think the stuff has gotten a little better. It's a little more diversified than it was last year. He's been in the zone a little more than last year. So the improvements are incremental, but meaningful. But I think I'm still sort of viewing him through the same lens of a guy that is probably such an uncomfortable at bat that I don't think we learn much until he gets to the upper levels. And then it's just that same sort of question we talked about earlier with Birdsell, where is the reliever risk versus he could be more than that drop off. And so I think prospect wise, I would rank him about the same, but I do feel really good about the fact that he came out and just continued to go where he left off last season.
So obviously, when he earns when he gets he's earned it. When he gets a promotion up to Double-A Tennessee, the numbers won't be this good. But in terms of that uncomfortable at bat for hitters, I don't think that he's going to get actually challenged where hitters are still comfortable in the batter's box against him until he reaches Triple-A.
Yeah,
I think even in Double-A, hitters are going to go up there and feel super uncomfortable. Now they're going to hit him around a little bit more. They're going to have to, because it's a next level up. But it's one thing to hit a guy around a little bit more, and for most batters to feel comfortable. I just don't think that's going to happen until Triple-A. I am also not higher on him than I was, just because a lot of what you said. This is how I viewed him. But this kind of dominance. This is what I had hoped for. This is what I expected to a certain degree if he was assigned back to South Bend, which he was. Get him up to Double-A. Obviously, this transition in the bullpen is super interesting, right? That kind of throws a wrinkle into the end of this, because if the Cubs view him as a reliever to try to see what they've got in him, because he is Rule 5 eligible this offseason, they've got to make a decision on if they're adding him to the 40-man roster this offseason. You'd obviously like to see him make his way even up to AAA Iowa to get a better view of him for the 40-man roster. I don't know. It's an interesting timing for this because we were planning on talking about Luke Little anyways.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of a weird timing for this It's a weird timing for this transition, I guess, because especially after he just went 5 innings, his career high on the mound, his last outing. So it's a strange timing for this transition. It's weird that they're still doing it down in South Bend. I don't know. It's just how do you view this transition?
I think we need to see what it is first, because it could be very, very much that in 5 days we just find out that he's just piggybacking somebody else and he's still getting 4 innings in relief, and he makes the start the next week, and maybe maybe South Bend has just somebody's rehab start this week and there's one extra starting pitcher to take on. So like until I see like 2-inning relief where he's told like throw as hard as you can, and we start to evaluate like what are the Cubs trying to do here. I don't know that I like have a firm opinion yet.
Well, actually, I might be wrong in this, so you might have to correct me if you know. Tyler Santana is scheduled to make the start tomorrow because Luke Little was scheduled for tomorrow in the rotation. Tyler Santana is now scheduled, and he was kind of quote unquote piggybacking with Luke Little. So you're right. We could just see the roles are like it could be the exact same thing. Just Luke Little is now out, quote unquote, out of the bullpen, and Tyler Santana is quote unquote starting. You know what I mean? So like.
And we mentioned Riley Thompson had a 2-inning relief appearance in the last week. And, I don't know if Riley's scheduled to start this coming week or not. Like there does seem to be a little bit of playing around with roles happening this early in the season. And I think, to a certain extent, we'll just let it shake out and then react to it when we have a more firm, like this is the plan.
Yeah. I've been trying to post the probable starters each morning.
I love it. I'm glad you're doing it.
I've been doing my best, but honestly, it's hard when you got a system where it's very, like you said, very fluid. Plus, you throw a rehabber in there. Iowa is always difficult because there's like 7 rotation type guys. You got Tennessee who never publishes their starting pitchers on time. All that good stuff. It becomes difficult. But all right, man. Anything else you want to plug as we send our guest out here?
No, I think, keep an eye out for the Haydn McGeary profile. That's going to be a fun one.
Yeah, that is going to be fun. Is that your first like big profile of the year this year?
Yeah, I try to do maybe 3 or 4 a year. And last year I did one on Porter Hodge. This time, like right at the beginning of May. So, trying to keep up with that schedule.
I think you timed up a couple of them last year where it was like, I don't know if this was intentional, but it was like as the guy was getting promoted up to the next level. I don't know if you just know your stuff or what.
Yeah, I think it's more luck than anything else.
All right, you can follow me on Twitter at Out of the Vines. You can follow him on Twitter at Cub Prospects. You can listen to the show anywhere where you find podcasts. You can view us on YouTube, all that good stuff. Be sure to leave a comment, leave a rating, leave a review. We love to see the comments. We'll try to comment back as much as we possibly can. Hopefully you guys, last week I debuted a new little intro video thing on YouTube. I don't know if you like that one or not. I'm going to try to bring it back this week. And in the meantime, I'll be back next week. I think Zumac is back with me next week. Honestly, I'm throwing his name out there. I haven't talked with him yet. So I might be throwing him under the bus, but we'll be back in your ears in one short week. Thank you guys so much for listening.
Yo.